But thank you for having me. Big thank you to the Psoriasis Association for inviting me to talk with you here today. The work they do is essential for patients like me and it's very much appreciated. So, my name is Joel Nelson. I'm a patient advocate and I'm here to talk to you today about the role of patients in healthcare, my experiences, why it matters, and how we could and should involve the patient in so much more in the delivery of their care. So, a little bit about me. My route to being here today is not one of traditional advocates. I haven't always been so forthcoming with my journey and health challenges, and in fact, I actively spent most of my life trying to hide them. I was diagnosed with JIA around the age of 12, but it onset at 10. I spent months of my childhood in hospital, as back then the sort of approach was to put me in a bed, throw everything at it, physio, hydro, drugs, and see what worked. I missed most of my year 9 at school, as they simply couldn't accommodate a kid in a wheelchair back then. And as you can imagine, as some kids are at that age, it wasn't the best of experiences trying to explain how I, as a teenager, had arthritis. So when I got my first remission at 17 years old, like many who go off to university, I took the opportunity to completely reinvent myself. And with it, ashamedly, I buried my childhood of disability. I would joke with friends why I had the disabled access room and stayed on halls for 3 years by saying I knew somebody on the inside. When we had socials in the hockey or rugby team, I'd have to run back to my room in the night to vomit when the inevitable cocktail of alcohol, methotrexate and painkillers got too much. I literally hid everything. And I'm the worst example for that, because I basically didn't want to hear the word considering anymore at the end of any more sentences. I felt like I'd spent my childhood where anything I'd done, which in my mind should have just been a normal, average achievement, would always end in the word considering. You did well considering. And that was what I was trying to avoid. I had a stressful life event in my mid-20s, which triggered psoriasis on a massive scale and also sort of confirmed that my JAA subtype was of psoriasis variety or psoriatic variety. It included massive lesions on my scalp, which is obviously going to be quite visible. And I also have had what I now know to be palmoplantar pustulosis, blisters on my hands and my feet, which are extremely painful. It had a huge impact on my mental health at the time. And again, for reasons why I think it's important to talk about, was because I'd spent my childhood crammed in rheumatology waiting rooms. There was no sort of child rheumatologist or pediatric sort of version to send me to back then. And I remember in those waiting rooms, there were sort of 3 things I was terrified as that kid in a wheelchair. Firstly, the looks of pity from people decades older than me, the window it cruelly gave me into my future, which will literally live with me forever, and the patients with severe psoriasis. I was so conscious of being a kid in a wheelchair and the questions that it brought me every single day that I just couldn't imagine being able to cope with something else that was so visible. But I wasn't stupid, and I knew that way back then that the rashes I had in places that no teenage boy was going to tell their doctor about looked the same as those that I saw on people's arms and legs back then. Through all I'd been through, I was ashamed that I was terrified of psoriasis, and I was shocked when no further support was offered to me in my 20s other than topical creams, when my body image and confidence had just changed so dramatically. Thankfully, I got access to biologics after that flare, and because it coincided with my liver finally no longer tolerating methotrexate, and basically I got my life back. I was fit and healthy. I'd taken up rugby, played field hockey for years, ran half marathons, done 100-mile cycling events. I was basically the pin-up of what a well-managed psoriatic disease could look like if there was such a thing. And I quickly fell back into that trap of hiding and forgetting about my underlying condition. Then in January 2019, with the arrival and the stress that it brings of my firstborn and the biosimilar switch coming out of nowhere, everything changed. I'd spent 2 years planning starting a family, and I've done that with the help of my medical team, the usual concerns that we would have of what you could pass on and is it safe, etc. And sulfasalazine was a blocker, but we were able to remove that for us to conceive, which sort of shows you how well the biologic was working for me. and it made me feel invincible. And working in the NHS myself, as well as my wife does, I happily accepted the change on the basis that I could be switched back and it would hopefully give access to more people having these drugs that gave me the life change that I got. But unfortunately, within 6 months, I was trying to navigate caring for a brand new baby on crutches, a baby I couldn't carry up the stairs, and a baby that I couldn't change nappies. I can't describe to you how difficult it is to try and change nappies when both your arms are occupied and a baby moves. And it was a baby that we'd planned based on me being the fittest I'd ever been. Probably wrongly, but it felt like it was under control. I quickly realised I had no support network and I had no plan B. It pushed my wife and I's relationship to the limit. A new baby's stressful enough, but when I suddenly was out of the game and couldn't help, that caused big problems. And by the time we got the green light for me to switch back to the original treatment after 11 months, the damage was done. Now, I'm no medically trained person, but as I understand it, after months of referrals to neurology, essentially the pain pathways that were created during that 11-month flare are still wide open. So every single day of my life, I've got pain in my heels, my right knee, my back and my neck, the same places I was flaring in through that whole time. And there's no fix for it. And I've had to learn to live with it. And it was probably the first time as an adult that I had to deal with what I had as a kid of people not understanding what they can't see. And for a long time, I didn't understand it myself. With all of this, I lost my social circle and my friends, and everything I did revolved on a Saturday, whether it was playing sport or whatever. And I couldn't explain to those people that I was playing rugby with just 2 months before how I went from this fit and healthy guy at sort of 11 stone and could do anything to suddenly couldn't get out of bed at the morning. I tried to explain, but I'd created this environment where it was physically impossible for me to make that something that could work because I'd just hid it all, and it wasn't conducive to then those friends helping me. I also realised for the first time how difficult it was to access treatments and support after years of remission. There was no transition between me being a kid with arthritis and an adult with arthritis. And back then, everything was thrown at me. And then suddenly as an adult, I don't have my parents there to advocate for me. I don't have doctors talking over my head to my parents to make decisions. I rung up about access and hydrotherapy and I was told, well, there's a big waiting list. You got that because you're a kid. And all of a sudden it was like, wow, I literally have no idea where I go for help or how to get back in the front door. I was in isolation for all of this time. And then obviously 6 months later, because of recent events, I was put under the shielding guidance due to the pandemic. So it kind of felt like for a year, I just disappeared off the planet and I was stuck behind my front door. So it took a lot to get here today, guys, just to point out. But mentally, I was in a dangerous place. And what's more, through that whole sort of traumatic experience, nobody asked me how I was coping. Nobody asked me how I was feeling. Nobody done a sort of mental health check-in. I was having all these nightmares of dropping the baby and falling down the stairs and dreams of having weights around my legs being at the bottom of a river. And my wife would sort of wake up and I'd be screaming. And it was all coming from that stress of all of this stuff being an issue again for me. After 9 months of that, and under the repeated advice of my GP and my wife, who were the sort of first to ask about my mental health, I took up writing as a way of dealing with my spiraling mental health. It was something I used to do as a kid in hospital beds and it kind of worked. But on this occasion, I also instantly found my voice, a voice that I didn't know I had. I found a whole community I didn't know was there. And within weeks, I started to receive daily messages from people who felt just like me, who felt like a failure because of the filtered representation of our disease online, people only sharing the wins, selling cures, and not the challenges of daily life with psoriatic disease. And at times that felt more hurtful than all the stigma I faced growing up with arthritis as a kid. Somehow people my own age sharing their best life and tossing around terms like thriving with arthritis, when I knew so fresh in my memory from just the year before that I could be so much more living without being in the shadow of my disease. That hurt more than all of those years of people saying, oh, I thought that was just what old people get. It was like being back in that waiting room as a teenager, being asked if my parents were being seen in a room or if I was lost and in the wrong place, which literally happened nearly every appointment I'd go to as a child. From that moment of realization that there was thousands of people out there like me, people who didn't feel like they had a voice or were being represented, and millions who just didn't understand the difference between wear and tear and inflammatory disease, I stopped writing for myself and started trying to be a voice for others. to comment on real life with psoriatic disease and the good and the bad, whilst trying to educate the unfamiliar on our experiences on a level that would make people stop and think, that would make a real human connection. So what are the barriers between patients like I was in that place and progress? When I was first diagnosed with psoriasis, I was given a faded, overcopied A4 piece of paper telling me what psoriasis was and a script for a steroid cream that I was told to use sparingly. I was in that room for less than 10 minutes for an issue that I'd been reporting for over 10 years. I was overwhelmed, upset, and needless to say, a little bit lost. I've been someone who'd been in and out of hospitals as a child and somebody who was used to asking questions and taking interest in my own care, yet I still didn't pump the brakes on that scenario or raise my hand. Perhaps it was because I was already a JIA patient and I already was under another specialist team, but I only saw a dermatologist once in the 10 years that have passed since then, and I've said nothing. I had to learn about my triggers and moisturise, and I need a daily morning hot bath and the routine and everything else on my own with the help of organisations like the Psoriasis Association and fellow patient advocates who have inspired me to go on and do what I'm doing here today. I've had the same amazing rheumatologist since I was 12 years old, and they've influenced my career and my life choices, and at times certainly like a second father figure to me. Perhaps that was part of the problem. Even in my mid-20s, I didn't feel like I could challenge anything or ask questions or have a voice. Pathways are not clear to patients. There should be a patient pathway on a page that we give to new patients at diagnosis, so they understand what gates they have to go through, from the route from topicals to oral systemics to biologics, so they not only understand what the treatments do in order to hopefully get them to engage and take them, but also so they know that you can't get the good stuff from day one when they're filled with a world of social media where people are basically celebrating these things that they feel like they can't get access to because they don't understand why. Patient education is key. It's not something to be feared. Enabling patients to be informed about their own care not only helps them to understand what is happening to them, but also what it is essential for them to be able to ask the right questions and have any hope of shared decision making. Something that is a personal goal of mine. I had psoriasis for 5 years before anybody told me that the blisters on my hands and feet were PPP and linked to my traditional psoriasis, which meant for 5 years I wasn't even using that steroid cream on it. Before I could have a conversation about how to properly care for such a thing, it was such an uncomfortable part of my psoriasis. And this isn't a good outcome for anyone. It certainly wasn't listed on that faded piece of paper. It's a gap that patients can help fill and talk about the issue in order to highlight that it's there, but we must be willing to let patients be part of that solution and part of that conversation. Too many current involvements that I've been involved in over the last couple of years have felt like tick box exercises. We're brought in late to say that patients were consulted. I'm constantly asked about what the patient journey is or what my pain points are, yet I've never seen a list of patient journeys or a pain point on a Murray board that captures the real issues for patients yet. And a good example of this is when I was playing rugby. I considered that I had my psoriasis under control. My feet were horrendous. I had nails falling off and blisters on my feet, but not being funny, in a changing room with 30 other guys, nobody's looking at your feet. And for me, that was a desirable outcome, and I was happy with that. And another example is a friend of mine in the community who's done lots of work with Psoriasis Association. She wears her psoriasis with pride, and she's an absolute inspiration. But for 1 year and 1 year only, she wanted to look great in her wedding dress and address her scalp psoriasis. But if we don't ask those conversations, if we don't understand that desirable outcomes for patients are fluid, then we don't know when to adapt the approach. So basically, the takeaway is the patients are fluid, they evolve, and the desirable outcomes, they evolve, and it's personal to that individual. If patients are brought in to consult on such things, when the deliverables are already outlined, then who is deciding what is needed in the first place? Let's flip that around so that doctors and patients are leading on that wish list. And it's important to mention here that the barriers I talk about are the ones faced by those actively engaged and trying to get involved in these things, or are sitting on charities lists of willing volunteers of people that are willing to get involved. There is still a lot of work to be done to reach and engage the majority of patients who do not have a voice, who are where I was 5 years ago. Many patients don't feel confident enough to advocate for themselves or understand what their own treatments do, let alone feel confident enough to be involved in focus groups. So there is a lot to be done if we are to unlock the full potential of the patient voice. We could start, however, by making conferences and forums like the good people of Psoriasis Association are doing here today, inclusive to all. As even as somebody who's just about confident enough to stand up here in front of you, professionals and revered experts, has unfortunately also had his fair share of being told I'm not welcome or that I don't have a place at the table. As a patient who just wants to listen and educate themselves in order to help others and improve patient outcomes, it's pretty demoralising. So, the power of lived experience. This first bit's aimed at patients, anyone in the room or listening at home. Your story matters. Nobody else can walk in your shoes, and nobody else can live 24 hours with your psoriatic disease and the challenges that you face with it. Talk about it. It doesn't need to be on stage or a podcast or on social media, and by all means do all of those things if you want to, but start by simply talking to somebody. A family member, a work colleague, anybody that shows an interest and you trust. Educate, inform, and share whatever you feel comfortable with, and you'll find it's rather therapeutic. Reach out to organisations like Psoriasis Association and ask how you can get involved. It's not only incredibly rewarding, but it'll introduce you to an entire community of people living with psoriatic disease. And with everything that's gone on over the last 2 years, my strongest relationships are other patients in this community, and it's the best support network you could ever ask for. Learn to advocate for yourself, and first and foremost, yourself. Don't be put off by questions about the number of swollen joints or how severe your rashes are if your biggest concern is your mood, your body image, or the impact on your sex life. If an element of your psoriatic disease is a problem for you, then it should be a problem for your doctor too. Communicate it. They can only help with what they know about. Ask questions. Don't suffer in silence and try to live a life of a lie that I did for so many years by trying to hide it. It's not healthy, and acceptance is a big part of psoriatic disease. Have the confidence to correct those around you who are uncomfortable and far off insulting suggestions like, have you tried? Instead, tell them, don't try and offer a cure, there isn't one. Just ask me what I need today. It's a simple but incredibly powerful thing, and it gives you an opportunity to open up more on those days when you're feeling like you're able to. And finally, patients, in big capital letters, do not compare. If you take anything away from this today, is that everyone's journey is different. Our condition is fluid, and you could have exactly the same symptoms as me, but I guarantee you, if we were to list them down, we'd put them in the different order in terms of the impact on us. If a celebrity or large following social media accounts of others living with our disease inspire you, then great, take what you need from them, but don't let anyone ever invalidate your experience. It's yours to own. And then finally, for the medical and healthcare professionals in the room, and from what I've heard already today, I'm probably preaching to the choir here, but I'm going to say it anyway. Patients have the unique ability to place a person, a real story, at the centre of science and medicine and the procedures. To link the disease to real life experience, how it impacts their families, careers, relationships, and mental health, and highlight the areas that need greater focus. Ask questions about these things. In pain management, we have experts by experience, and we place them at every stage of the service delivery, from group therapy to seminars, and we're now starting to be used in one-to-one sessions. We use our story to help new patients to the service, give the time for the techniques to work, to be open-minded and to say, we've been where you are, we were skeptical, and we see you. We help patients link to professionals so that everybody understands what everyone's working to and why. Place the patient at the heart of everything you do. In-house expertise in every charity, organisation, pharmaceutical company, and working alongside policymakers. A patient voice that can be heard before outcomes have been decided. A place you can find out what the real need is, rather than finding gaps for the sake of filling gaps. We are on the same side, and none of us are claimed to be medically trained or qualified researchers. We are simply experts by experience, and we should be an asset, not the enemy. And that's also something I tell all the patients in my DMs as well. So it works both ways. Ultimately, we want the same things, but sometimes our priorities might be different. With patients involved at all levels, experts by experience, we can not only improve inclusion and have a shared sense of ownership, reduce wasted resources and improve doctor-patient relations, but we can work towards a more personalised, person-centric approach where we start treating people as a whole, their life with psoriatic disease, rather than simply focus on the rashes or the number of swollen joints in that snapshot in time that a medical professional happens to see you. So ask questions. Make notes of the ones you didn't think to ask. Include patients in everything that you do. Embrace our experiences, and together we can achieve the same desired outcomes. In the absence of lived experience, lend your ears. Thank you for listening.